Greg J. Stoker is a veteran, U.S. military veteran. He's an activist. He's the host of Colonial Outcasts and State of Play on Mint Press News. He is therefore absolutely qualified to be our guest this evening on these great events unfolding. Greg Stoker, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Nice to see you again. The big enchilada, is Trump going to attack Iran? If so, when and with what force, do you think?
Well, we've been watching a pretty big buildup. We've tracked at least 4 to 7 B-2 stealth bombers. They have extended capabilities to drop 3 30,000-pound ground penetrators, which is obviously meant to collapse caves in Afghanistan. That's where they were first developed for. And now the theory is for nuclear hard sites underground in Iran. They're staging out of Diego Garcia Air Base, which is out in the Indian Ocean, because a lot of our Arab allies, where we have bases in the Gulf and Qatar, they've said specifically they do not want us to use their airspace for strikes on Iran. So it's conveniently out there. It's always been a staging ground for operations in the Persian Gulf. So we're watching that build up. But you know what's interesting, George? We just had the Senate Intelligence Committee on Global Threats, which is something we have every year here in America at the beginning of each new year. And Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, said categorically during the global threat assessment that there is no evidence that Iran is currently trying to develop a nuclear weapon. They kind of stopped all their ambitions with that regard in 2003. So we're watching this man, Trump, who was platformed as this anti-war candidate, become just a straight bomb Iran neocon. And there's a lot of reasons for it. One of them being, isolating Iran, separating them from China. He wants to use this opportunity to implement a pan-Arab Abraham Accords. So for the audience that was just tracking, last administration, he pushed for the Abraham Accords, which was the normalization between Bahrain and the UAE and Israel. Well, he's kind of definitely signaled that he wants to do that for the entire Middle East and Gulf region, and separating Iran from that region is part of his massive foreign policy initiative.
Yeah, because the demand is not only on the nuclear file. Some people are missing that point. The demand is far more far-reaching. It is a demand that Iran cease to have any hinterland in the Arab world, have any allies in the Arab world, cut itself off from the Arab world, because Trump knows that Iran has millions of supporters, often co-religionists, but not always, who will reject the Abraham Accords. And if Iran is still around to help them, their opposition to the Abraham Accords will be that much more vibrant. So it's not just the nuclear question, although that's what the media usually focuses on. It is an attempt to force Iran to destroy its ballistic missile capability, its ability to fight back against distant enemies, and to, as I say, end its role supporting people like the Ansar Allah in Yemen, like the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like the resistance in Palestine. He's really going for the whole shebang. The question is, and I appreciate you can't know, neither can I, but the question is he fully appraised of what the likely impact outcome might be if he does go to war with Iran?
Well, first of all, I'd like to add one more thing in terms of the conceptualizing the geopolitical situation around this. It's not just about separating Iran from the Arab world and the Abraham Accords. There's also a concern with isolating China, right? The BRI, China's Belt and Road Initiative, their massive global infrastructure plan. Iran is very important for that. The U.S. has, in the West, has a competing global infrastructure. It's not global; it's regional. It's called the IMEC corridor, India through the Middle East, through the port of Haifa into Europe. It's decades behind the Belt and Road Initiative, so that's also part of this destabilizing Iran, regime change in Iran. The interesting thing about U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Iran, it really hasn't changed. So if you guys want if the audience wants a point of reference, you can Google The Path to Persia. It's a 2009 position paper on how to implement regime change, affect a siege or a war or a limited war in Iran, put forth by the Brookings Institute. And what we're seeing right now is just a posture, a buildup based off of these old think tank pieces that have been around, floating around Washington since 2000, well, since the early 2000s. So does Trump understand what would a war with Iran entail? Probably. I don't think he's that completely incompetent. First of all, Iran, very difficult geography. There's deserts, there's mountainous regions, which would be hell to deal with in terms of a counterinsurgency perspective. The population's 5 times that of Iraq, and Iraq was pretty easy terrain. We controlled the airspace. There's actually no way we could militarily control Iran, because then you'd have to set up a security force, which would basically entail like half of the U.S. armed forces just to implement a new regime, quote unquote, nation building operations. So the most we could do is strike hard sites, and then Iran will retaliate. They can overwhelm U.S. air defenses on U.S. bases in Iraq, in Qatar, all through the Gulf region. There's literally nothing we can do to stop them. And to the extent you mentioned the popular mobilization units in Iraq, well, Pete Hegseth recently called, and this was reported in Iraqi media, the president of Iraq, and said, we will strike targets in Iraq if any of the PMU retaliate against U.S. bases based off our bombing of Yemen and a hostility towards Iran. So we're kind of prepping for this, I don't know, kind of annihilation situation where we can bomb Iran, our bases will get X'd out. So this is kind of why I, who still hold to sanity, think that this hopefully will just fizzle out, because there's nothing to be militarily achieved by striking Iran. We can't invade them. We can't destroy their nuclear program, which, according to our own director of national intelligence, does not exist in terms of a weapons manufacturing platform. So I don't know, what are we doing here? We're just doubling down on late stage mask off imperialism, and it's not going to end well for the U.S. The U.S. military is already stretched thin while having a massive budget. There's a massive recruiting crisis. Again, people don't want to be invested in foreign wars and go to die overseas like we did for the past 20 years. It's just this intractable situation. And from the imperial perspective, it seems like the entire system's in cascade failure. We still have a lot of inertia behind us, which is why we can put billions of dollars of air assets in a base out of like Diego Garcia and move a couple of carrier groups into the region. But again, there's nothing we can accomplish that's achievable. It's actually insanity. So, well, but we're going to keep doing it.
I think that's, I mean, I've read the book, The Art of the Deal, and I'm watching Trump now as he browbeats people around the world into giving way to his demands, or rather what his demands really are, as opposed to what they are on the top line. So, for example, he basically threatened to invade Panama, and now he got his way in Panama. China no longer owns the warehouses by the side of the Panama Canal, which is all they ever controlled. They never controlled the canal, as Trump lied. But now BlackRock does control the canal. So he got his way there. He may well get his way with Canada without having to invade it and enlist King Charles into the war of national defense, which the Canadians seem pretty committed to conducting if he does. He's not going to invade Canada. And our last guest certainly believed that he's not going to invade Greenland either. So these are all just out of the deal performances by Donald Trump, aren't they? They are extreme belligerence. They are crazy Trump behavior in the hope that some part of what it is he's looking for falls into his lap for the fear of avoiding something worse. Is that possibly what's going on?
Well, I try to resist sensationalism. I remember last year I invested a lot of time in trying to dispel this fear or this mania around National Guard units deploying to Syria. They thought it signaled an escalation of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And if you actually looked at the deployment orders, it's like, no, they were just rotating out from the counter-ISIS operations in Syria out of a legal basis, of course, but it wasn't an escalation of forces. So when we look at this buildup in the Persian Gulf and the moving of another carrier group into the region, which is a significant strike package in terms of capabilities, this is not unprecedented. The U.S. masses forces to isolate and to deter different regional adversaries, as we would call them. So the same thing happened with a similar complement in 2022 out of Australia in order to deter China over the Strait of Taiwan. So I'm looking at this, and yes, the rhetoric, the strike packages and the capabilities are alarming, but I think it's going to be more, as you said, art of the deal. This is basically just a show of force because sanctions aren't working against Iran. It hasn't worked out. The Iranian government has its own problems, but they said they're not going to negotiate a new nuclear deal under these terms. So what do? More posturing. And I just don't think the American people are ready for a direct conflict with another sovereign power. Bombing the Houthis, fine. Sending money to Israel to bomb Gaza, Lebanon, annex the West Bank, and occupy Syria, fine. But the actual commitment of U.S. forces against, another sovereign nation, the consent hasn't been built yet. They're trying, but it's just not there.